Welcome back. One of the most important feature of Spring Boot is Spring Boot starter projects. Typically, whenever I need to build an application, I need a lot of frameworks. For example, if I would want to build a REST API, I need Spring Framework, Spring MVC framework, I need Tomcat to run the application in, I would need to do JSON conversion. If you look at this specific REST API, we are returning a list of courses back. If you look at the response, it's a JSON response. This is what is called JSON conversion. From your Java list of courses to a JSON list. So whenever we're building a REST API, we need all these things. If let's say I would want to write a unit test, I would need Spring Test Framework, I would need JUnit Framework, I would need Mockito Framework. So whenever we want to build any application feature, we need a lot of frameworks. The question is, how can I group them and make it easy to build applications? That's what starter projects provide. They provide convenient dependency descriptors for different features. If I open up my pom.xml, it's directly in Learn Spring Boot. So Learn Spring Boot, pom.xml, this is where we define all our Maven dependencies. And over here, you would see that we are making use of two different starter projects. What are the starter projects we are making use of? Spring Boot Starter Web and Spring Boot Starter Test. Spring Boot Starter Web enables you to build REST API and web applications. Spring Boot Starter Test helps you to write unit tests. You can go ahead and do a control click or a command click in here. This would open up Spring Boot Starter Web. Spring Boot Starter Web, starter for building web, including RESTful applications using Spring MVC. If you scroll down in here, you would see that it defines a number of dependencies in here. What are the dependencies which are defined in here? The first one will help you to launch a Spring context. We would want to do bean to JSON and JSON to bean conversion. That's Spring Boot Starter JSON. It helps you with JSON conversion. We would want to be able to run the application in Tomcat. That's where we would make use of Spring Boot Starter Tomcat. And we would want to be able to use Spring MVC framework to build our REST API. So these are the dependencies for that. So as you can see in here, Spring Boot Starter defines all the dependencies that you would need to build a specific kind of application. For example, to build a web application or REST API, these are the things that you would typically need, and these are predefined for you. So Spring Boot starters are nothing but convenient dependency descriptors. If I would want to build a web application, I need A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and all of them are predefined for me when I'm making use of a starter. Spring Boot provides you with a variety of starter projects. Depending on the feature you need for your specific project, you can make use of different starter projects. If you are building a web application and REST API, you can make use of Spring Boot Starter Web. We saw that it brings in dependencies Spring Web MVC and Spring Web. These are Spring MVC. It brings in Tomcat. It brings in JSON conversion and things like that. Similar to this, there are a number of other starters. If you want to be able to write unit tests easily, you can make use of Spring Boot Starter Test. If you want to be able to talk to a database, let's say you want to use a database like Oracle or MySQL, and you'd want to be able to write code to talk to the database using JPA. In that kind of scenario, you can make use of Spring Boot Starter Data JPA. If you want to talk to a database using JDBC, in that kind of scenario, you can make use of Spring Boot Starter JDBC. If you want to secure your web application, or if you want to secure your REST API, you can make use of Spring Boot Starter Security. In this step, we talked about Spring Boot starter projects. There are two key takeaways as far as I am concerned. Number one, Spring Boot starter projects are convenient dependency descriptors. To build a specific kind of application, you might need a set of dependencies. For example, to build a web application, you need a set of dependencies. All of these are predefined in starter projects. Number two is the fact that Spring Boot provides you with a variety of starter projects. Depending on your use case, you can choose the right startup project. Now, is it sufficient if I have the right dependencies in the class path? Nope. You need to also configure them. That's what we'll be looking at in the next step.